Hello and welcome back to Global LPG Conversations. My name is David Appleton from the business development team at Argus Media, and today I am joined by our associate editor of biofuels, Giulia Squadrin. Hi, Giulia. How are you today?
Hey, David. All good. Thanks. Good to be here.
Good. And yeah, very good to have you here because obviously this is an LPG themed podcast series, and you are very much from the world of biofuels and the Argus biofuels desks, who do some excellent coverage, or a lot of excellent coverage of various types of biofuels in Europe and around the world. And today we are talking about biopropane because we're just in the process of launching a price for biopropane, which will cover the ARA market. Just a little bit of background here. I would say over the past couple of years, at Argus, we have had increasing calls from a number of different market participants to add transparency to the biopropane market. It's a product which exists, is sold on the market, it's not particularly liquid, and the volumes are still relative to conventional fuels quite low. But what's interesting, I would say, over this sort of past couple of year period is that we've seen increasing interest from both the petrochemical side of the business and then also the heating and the auto gas side as well. So there's a lot of interest in the product across the different range of usage that we have for it. So we have now gone ahead and put together assessments, which I'm going to ask Giulia to basically go through and explain what that's all about and how we do it and so forth. So over to you, Giulia. To start with, can you tell us a bit more about this new price and how it fits within the Argus Biofuels coverage?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for setting the scene, David. So in the biofuels market, what it means for us launching this biopropane assessment, it basically is going to complete our suite of hydrotreated biofuels price assessments. And just for context, hydrotreated biofuels are drop-in fuels that can replace fossil fuels without any modification, engine modification, or crackers modifications, depending on the application. So this is true for the road transport sector, for aviation, but also for petchems production and heating. So these hydrotreated biofuels all come from the same facility, basically. So from the same plant, one would get HVO, or hydrotreated vegetable oil, or renewable diesel, which is primarily used in the road transport sector, but also can be used for in petrochemicals application as a feed for a cracker. Another major hydrotreated biofuel is SAF, for sustainable aviation fuel, and specifically HEFA SPK, so it's a type of SAF. And these two usually, so HVO and SAF, usually account for the largest share of production. And depending on whether the SAF yield is maximized or whether the HVO yield is maximized, the plant will produce a stream of bio-naphtha and of a bio-LPG mix, which can then be further split into biobutane and biopropane. So we have been pricing HVO and SAF since 2020 and bio-naphtha since March last year. So launching this new biopropane price, which is going to be a daily assessment actually, will complete the suite of these products. And I think it's important to note that we have been focusing on hydrotreated biofuels that are produced from a particular feedstock, so used cooking oil in this case. So with the exception of HVO, for which we price 4 different classes from various different feedstocks, including UCO-based HVO, for SAF, HEFA SPK, for bio-naphtha, and for biopropane, we will be focusing on UCO, which is a waste feedstocks that under the Renewable Energy Directive, so these overarching European legislation setting renewable targets for transport, UCO is classified as a waste feedstock under Annex 9, Part B. And, I'm not going to go into detail all the legislative aspects, but there's reasons why UCO is incentivized for road transport applications, but also seems to be one of the preferred feedstocks for other uses such as petrochemicals and so on. So basically on the biofuel side, we have a very good view of the entire hydrotreated complex. We have HVO trading on Argus Open Markets, and we have this completing this suite and having a good overview of what happens in some of the other similar but slightly more liquid markets, and also a good view of the feedstocks market, it does help a lot with pricing some of these emerging markets, such as biopropane.
Great, thanks, Giulia. That's a really useful overview. And so I guess just a note within the wider suite of Argus reports, we're kind of bringing together two of our strongest areas, which are biofuels and, of course, LPG, for which we are the European benchmark and have benchmarks elsewhere. Market participants in both of these areas will be able to have a view on the pricing of biopropane in our reports. So yeah, connected to that last point, through going through the research process and putting together the methodology for the assessment, firstly, who's interested in this, and how do you see the market developing going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and it's very interesting because we have started to see, the biofuels market had primarily been, revolving around transportation and especially the road transport sector. But recently, we have seen a lot more interest emerging from different areas that haven't been traditionally the ones that have been driving biofuels demand and growth in the biofuels market. So specifically for biopropane, we see demand from from road transport, so where you would replace conventional LPG, conventional propane, but also from the petrochemical sector, where we already see the use of bionaphtha and HVO as a feed for crackers to produce biopolymers, but also from the heating sector, so off-grid heating. Just to give you some context, for example, the UK recently said in its biomass strategy that bio-LPG and renewable DME can have a role in decarbonizing off-grid heating. And just in the UK, there's around 1.1 million homes that are not connected to the gas grid in England alone. So, there is definitely potential, and it's going to be interesting to see how the market will develop. So what we have seen in the past is that having a mandated market on the road side, so obligations that need to be met by obligated parties under the national legislations, that usually sets a floor for prices. So they drive prices, these mandated applications for renewable fuels. But it really will depend on how some of these markets will develop, in the sense of incentivizing the use of some of these renewable fuels or setting targets and so on. So I think the market has a lot of potential, and SAF and HVO capacity is growing significantly in the coming years, up to we have data until 2028, 2030. So those are the projects that have been already publicly announced. But there could be even further investments on top of that. So definitely the volumes will grow. And it's going to be interesting, I think, to see which sector is going to manage to get their hands on the majority of the volumes.
Yeah, and I think that last point is really, really key to the whole situation with biopropane and the various segments which want to get hold of the product. So if I may ask, kind of objectively, what those challenges could be that could slow down the development as well, because obviously there are a lot of competing interests in the bio space. And so yeah, what are your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a good question. A bit of a tough question, I would say. I can speak to what we have witnessed so far for some of these products that we have been covering for a while already, and that have had similar dynamics in terms of competition for feedstock, for products, and for renewable fuels and so on. So, for example, in the bionaphtha market, right, which can be used for in blending with gasoline, but also for petrochemicals production, something we've seen is that, in the past, we've seen petrochemical sector paying a high premium compared to the road transport sector, just because the supply was so limited that if they wanted to get their hands on the product, they had to pay up for it. But then, we see this is driven really by voluntary commitments of some of these companies that have decided to market a certain amount of renewable polymers by a certain date. And similarly, on the heating sector, there's all these efforts to decarbonize and to reduce emissions. But as of today, we don't have a legislation that mandates a specific volume or energy share of renewable fuels in the mix, right? For off-grid heating. So I mean, we're going towards that situation, getting more structure, getting more incentives or help for the industry, but we're not quite there yet in some of these applications. So what has happened in the past, it's been that while on the roadside, you have a lot of different products you can use to decarbonize, but in case of non-compliance, obligated parties will tend to face a fine or reputational costs and so on. So that has meant that, in the context of political uncertainty, inflation, economic hardships, and so on the voluntary side, we've seen some of those commitments. While they're still there in principle, in the short term, we have seen a bit of a decline in demand for some of these more expensive renewable fuels, because if you look at the cost of biopropane versus propane, or bionaphtha versus naphtha, or HVO versus diesel, the premiums are quite significant. And so in sectors where the market didn't have to, they have decided sometimes, in some cases, to reduce purchases. So that's a trend we have seen, but I would say that in the long term, with more volumes available, and definitely that's the focus of the industry and of all application, to reduce emissions, and it's the path has started towards that direction. There could be hiccups along the way, but I think the trend is pretty clear that we'll see a bigger effort toward reducing emissions. So yeah, probably rambled on a little bit on this
that's
one.
Brilliant. No, not at all. That's a really comprehensive, I think, assessment of where the market is, of where the industry is, by extension, where pricing is, and how it all connects with policy. I guess one can say that mandates are both a carrot and a stick at the same time, and there is always going to be this need to push, but at the same time the need for the industry to invest and move into these products, which, to be fair to the LPG sector, they really have been over the past few years. So we are very happy to be able to offer our contribution to that transition through the form of this assessment. So just from my side in the LPG team, I just want to put out a massive thank you to you, Giulia, and the biofuels desk for doing this. And I think a lot of people will be really interested to see how this develops. And also, I will note quickly that you mentioned the UK there as a good example of one of the markets where there's going to be growth. Giulia will be presenting at the annual UK LPG conference, or Liquid Gas UK conference, in Liverpool at the beginning of November. So if anyone wants to have an in-depth chat with her, she'll be there, and we'll be happy to talk all things bioproducts, HVO, SAF, LPG, and so on. So brilliant. Okay, I think we can wrap things up there. So thanks very much, Giulia.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the shout out for Liverpool.
Yeah, that actually happens to be my football team as well. So maybe you can catch a game while you're there. Just to note, just for housekeeping, that this biopropane assessment is launching on the 2nd of October. So depending when you're listening to this, it may have already launched or will be shortly about to. So great. Okay, thanks again, and goodbye. And we'll be back again with another podcast soon.